Nubia, to Egypt's south, was a more pressing matter. Known to the Egyptians as the land of Cush, it yielded enormous amounts of gold from its mines. Moreover, Nubia linked Egypt with the Sudanese regions, was the source of the treasured African exotics such as ivory, ebony, leopard skin, ostrich eggs and plumes, and along with more practical commodities included cattle and slaves. The pharaohs had controlled Nubia until the Hyksos invaded Egypt. The Nubians had then seized the opportunity to break away from the Egyptian dominance. Under Thutmose I, Egypt managed to subdue all Nubian resistance and regain hegemony, making Nubia its southernmost province. The land was placed in the charge of a viceroy, embellished with the title of Prince of Cush and Overseer of the Southern Lands. Answerable only to the pharaoh, this governor was responsible for ensuring that Thebes received a steady traffic of ships laden with ivory, ebony, and every other beautiful product of the land in addition to the yield of the harvest. Within his own realm, the viceroy commanded the armed forces. In addition, he indoctrinated the tribespeople so thoroughly with Egyptian ideas and institutions that in the distant future, Nubia would remain faithful to the Egyptian model long after Egypt itself had fallen to foreigners. At home, Amenhotep I sought a return to the traditions that had prevailed before the takeover by the Hyksos, particularly pyramid building to house the royal remains. His successor, Thutmose I, however, started a new tradition. Instead of constructing a pyramid as his final resting place, he decreed that his mummified remains should be hidden in a tomb hewn out in the limestone cliffs of an isolated valley that lay beyond the mountains of western Thebes. Clearly undertaken to thwart thieves, who were already pillaging the graves of the wealthy, the tomb-building project was, according to a nobleman who supervised the excavation work, carried out in such great secrecy, with no one seeing and no one hearing. Subsequent pharaohs followed the precedent set by Thutmose I until the brooding 1,000-foot-high cliffs of the so-called Valley of the King were honeycombed by passageways leading to the sepulchres of no fewer than 40 monarchs. For Egypt, the shift in royal burial policy had unforeseen consequences. Previously, pharaonic mortuary chapels, where the last rites were held, had been situated close to the pyramidal tombs, making it easy for the pharaoh's spirit to journey back and forth to them. Now, however, the cramped valley offered no space for the chapels, which were built instead beyond the western mountain barrier. Perhaps to compensate for the inconvenience thereby caused to the king's traveling spirits, and certainly to show off the mortuary chapels as tangible evidence of royal affluence, the pharaohs lavished Egypt's wealth on the chapels, which gradually grew in size and grandeur. Thus, in the 5th generation after Thutmose I, the chapel complex of Amenhotep III, with its golden doors and silver pavements, was designed as an everlasting fortress, possessor of eternity. The mortuary establishments of the pharaohs, as well as the temples dedicated to the gods they revered, required enormous staffs to conduct religious ceremonies and to maintain the premises. Amenhotep would claim that he had assigned the staggering total of 89,600 Asiatic slaves to work on temple properties, while Amenhotep III would boast that his own mortuary estate was filled with male and female slaves, the children of the chiefs of all the foreign lands. With Thutmose I ensconced in his lonely tomb, there occurred an extraordinary interruption in this succession of military-minded kings who had set Egypt on the course of empire. The dead king's son and successor, Thutmose II, was scarcely 20 years old, physically feeble, mentally flaccid, and badly henpecked by his wife, Hatshepsut, who also happened to be his half-sister. Such incestuous arrangements were by no means uncommon in dynastic Egypt. As might be expected, these unions led to some wildly tangled relationships. When Hatshepsut, as the great royal wife, failed to produce a male heir to the throne, a son of Thutmose II by a harem girl was designated to succeed. At the same time, the boy, a mere child, was declared married to one of Hatshepsut's daughter by Thutmose II, and thus When Thutmose II died and Thutmose III inherited the crown at the age of 6, the regent named to control affairs during the next king's childhood was none other than Hatshepsut, who was at once his aunt, his stepmother, as well as mother-in-law. As a princess, Hatshepsut, by her own description, had been exceedingly good to look upon, a beautiful maiden, fresh and serene of nature. She was also extremely ambitious, even unscrupulous, and after biding her time as controlling regent for perhaps a couple of years, she declared herself to be Egypt's pharaoh, ignoring Thutmose III's right to succession. Her qualifications in this were dubious. As a woman, she technically could not rule as pharaoh. To endow her assumption with the divine approval, she had reliefs made showing the god Amun-Re wooing her mother on the occasion of Hatshepsut's conception. To gloss over her gender, Hatshepsut was depicted as flat-chested, in a king's clothing, wearing a false beard that customarily adorned the faces of male pharaohs. Indeed, she took for herself all the usual pharaonic titles, save one, that of the mighty bull. Her sovereignty caused endless confusion among Egyptian scribes who alternately called their royal master she and he. Despite her treachery, Hatshepsut proved to be an able ruler. Egypt was in submission, wrote a scribe, for she was a dictator of excellent plans. Generally eschewing the military adventures of her predecessors, she focused on restoring Egypt to its former prosperity by renewing the foreign commerce that had lapsed during the Hyksos occupation. In the 9th year of her reign, for example, she dispatched a trading expedition to the fabulous land of Punt on Africa's Somalian coast. Sailing the length of the Red Sea, 5 great cargo ships made safe landfall at Punt, where the seamen were personally greeted by a local prince and his wife. Egyptians treated the chief and his spouse to a banquet of beer, bread, wine, meat, fruits, and all the good things of Egypt. When the feasting was done, the trading began. In exchange for such trinkets as rings and beads, the visitors loaded the holds of their ship with all kinds of beautiful plants, heaps of myrrh, live myrrh trees, ebony, genuine ivory, gold, costly woods, incense, eye cosmetics, apes, monkeys, greyhounds, leopard skins, and slaves together with their children. He returned to the fleet on the occasion for the pharaoh Hatshepsut to briefly cast aside her masculine pretensions and make her limbs fragrant as the dew of the gods with ointments and myrrh. Throughout Hatshepsut's reign, the helpless Thutmose III seethed and plotted. He was clearly a stronger man than his hapless father, yet not until he was in his late 20s did he muster enough power to oust the usurper, who apparently died in the process. The manner of Hatshepsut's overthrow is unknown. So is the cause of her death, which under the circumstances may very well have been violent. At any rate, no sooner had he grasped the crown that was properly his than Thutmose III, in a burst of released frustration, set out to erase his stepmother's name from Egyptian memory. Following his orders, squads of men spread the length and breadth of the land, hacking Hatshepsut's name from her monuments and the walls of her temples. Thutmose also let it be known that he meant to reverse the hated Hatshepsut's peaceable policies. On the day he assumed power, the new ruler proclaimed general mobilization of Egypt's armed forces. He was well prepared for the role of conqueror. During the long and restless years he spent waiting to become pharaoh, Thutmose, in the established tradition of a sporting king, had schooled himself in martial arts and avocations. Although small of stature, he was extremely strong, and his scribes were tireless in describing his physical feats. He used to shoot at a copper target, wrote one. It was an ingot of beaten copper, 3 fingers thick, with his arrow stuck in it, having passed through and protruding out the other side by 3 handbreadths. I speak accurately of what he did. After all, it was in the presence of the entire army. In the spring of 1483 BCE, Thutmose set forth with his army towards Syria, where the bonds forged by the early pharaohs of the 18th dynasty had been cast off while Hatshepsut reigned. With the lapse of Egyptian influence, Mitanni had moved into northern Syria and had set up a group of vassal states in northern and central Palestine as a buffer against future Egyptian incursions. And so it was that Thutmose III found himself confronted by a coalition of 330 Canaanite princes, loyal to the Mitanni and commanded by the king of Kadesh.